Our next speaker is Alex Roberts from the Department of Innovation, Industry, Science and Research.
Thank you for the opportunity to speak to you all today. I'll just note I love the superhero theme. When I first started working on this 2009, a few of us joked that what we really needed was a captain innovation to come and break through some of the many barriers that you might come across when working on innovation in the public sector. Unfortunately, we haven't found too many of those, so in the meantime we've been trying to put together some resources on how to apply innovation and how to work through some of those issues that you might come across. Earlier this year we released the APS Innovation Action Plan, which was signed off by our portfolio secretaries and articulates sort of where we're trying to get to with innovation across the Australian public service. One of the main things that we've also tried to do is, through this is recognise that the federal public service isn't going to have all the answers. We need to talk with our colleagues at the state and territory level and also at the local government level, as well as those overseas in international public sector agencies. So we've tried to make the resources that we have open to all members of the public service. One of those things that we've done has been building up a network of interested public servants, academics and practitioners, and if you're not on it, I strongly encourage you to join and send me an email. We've had a public sector innovation blog going for about 17 months now, where we track developments in innovation and talk about issues that have arisen and new insights. We've developed an online showcase, a toolkit which I'll talk about. We're working on a proposal for an APS design centre modelled on MindLab in Denmark. And hopefully we'll have some more news about that very shortly. And there's also a project called the Australian Public Sector Innovation Indicators Project, which is about how to measure innovation and how you know whether it's working. But the main thing I'm here to talk to you about today is the Innovation Toolkit. We've already been talking a lot about ideas and innovation, but one of the issues that you have in the public sector I've found is that you've got all this interest, but then where do you go from there? Generally you're starting with a problem that needs an innovative response, but what do you do next? These are some of the things that generally you have to think about, whether it be for a single idea or whether you're trying to think about the innovation system in your agency as a whole. Innovation isn't an easy process, and we need to be systematic about it. And we also can't expect a lot of the people who are intersecting with innovation to have all of the skills and knowledge that they need to be across this. So what we're trying to do with the toolkit is capture a lot of the lessons that other people have learnt, the link to the relevant information that is out there, and help people cut down the learning time and work out how to apply their idea quickly or whether to get rid of it. It's very much a living resource and will grow over time. One of my favourite bits of the toolkit is the section called Ideas for the Public Sector. This is about what you do at the point of when you've got an idea. It's based on the work of Professor Jack English down at the University of Tasmania, who's done a lot of work on public and private sector innovation and has captured what I think are the core elements of what you need to think about when you have an idea. So starting with the point of you've got an idea, you may have lots of ideas, or in the organisation there'll be lots of ideas. There's generally not a shortage of ideas, that's not usually the problem. Working out which one you should actually pursue and dedicate resources to is. Now, not all ideas are good, or they might seem good at the first, but then turn out not to be. Not all ideas are wanted by those who you're going to give your idea to or need it, or it might not just be the right time. So we need a process for filtering those ideas, and that's where ideas, innovation development early assessment system comes in. It offers a systematic approach for considering your ideas. It's a series of 20 questions, such as this one, looking at the issue of the problem and how it's perceived, the nature of the need, problem or opportunity addressed by my idea is, and then you've got the scale there, from completely clear to me and those in my organisation, all the way down to completely misunderstood and needs a lot more research and understanding. The advantage of this system, and I won't go through the other 19 questions, you can look them up on the site yourself, is that it gets you to think about all of the different aspects of an idea and how it's going to be received by others in your organisation. The real strength of this approach is that it doesn't require you to do a lot of research. It's helping you draw out your inherent knowledge of your idea and thinking about, well, do I know whether it's completely clear to me and those in my organisation? It doesn't require you to do lots of extra work to establish that. It's just a matter of helping you pull out those elements and go, yes, that's an area I need to think about more, or no, I'm confident that that's addressed as it is in my idea. So it's a relatively quick way of helping you assess your idea. At the end of the questionnaire, there's a map here where you can map out the strengths, how your idea has scored, and calculate your score and see whether the framework advises you to abandon the idea, to refine it, or to proceed. The map will let you see where the idea is likely strongest or where it needs work. So it might be very strong on the problem definition, but you've got a lot of issues to deal with the reputational risk. The other advantage of this is it might help be a framework for you to talk about ideas within your organisation and talk to others about it. One of the issues in the innovation is we often don't have a common language to talk about these concepts. And I think this is a pretty good framework for being able to say to other people in your organisation, look, I think this idea is really good, however I'm concerned about the operational resources or the external support. It allows you to codify that thinking into a simple framework. At the moment it's very much a static feature, but we will be turning it into an interactive feature on the website in the near future. Other parts that the toolkit address is looking at how to build a business case. For instance, well, once you've got your idea that you want to proceed with, often you'll need to consider how to convince others that yes, this is something that needs to be followed. We're hoping that the toolkit assists you in that process. One of the key things to focus on is, as Terry said, you're doing innovation for a reason. You're not doing it for the sake of it. Generally in the public service, that's related to a problem or an area of dissatisfaction with what's currently in place. So clearly articulating what is the problem with the status quo is really important in the innovation process. It's also important to think about the risks, and we're all probably very familiar with that process, but it's not just the risks of acting, it's also the risks of what happens if you don't do anything. If there is a problem, what's going to happen if that just continues into the future? Is it going to get worse? Are those risks going to increase? That can help you put into perspective whether the risks of acting are really as great as you think. We need to think about the skills and resources. It'll be obvious. You know that it'll be there, and everyone will go, oh great, that is such a fantastic idea, why didn't we do it so much earlier? Unfortunately, innovation is a very experimental process and it can have a lot of unexpected outcomes. We need to think about what happens if it's not a straightforward, you put in the idea and this happens? What happens if there are other outcomes? We also need to think about what will happen if the idea does work as you'd hoped. What are going to be the consequences for the rest of your organisation? How is it going to affect other business areas? How is it going to affect in terms of skills or resources needed? Is it going to be scaled up and then require a whole lot more? Is it an idea that you can implement in a small way and that'll be fine? Or is it something that once you've started, you really have to continue escalating and making it bigger? And those are important questions that can often be forgotten. We've also been building a series of modules around some of the different tools that have been identified as helpful for the innovation process in public sector organisations, how we organise for innovation, and that generally includes some form of system to manage the ideas that come up, competitions and prizes, as was mentioned with Kaggle, the innovation roles and values within an organisation, a mechanism of challenge by which barriers or processes that inadvertently are stopping a new idea can be challenged. And we've got another module just coming in the next week or two on the whole issue of measuring innovation. There are many more to come. It's a little bit of a slower process than we'd hoped, but there's quite a lot of information out there, and we're hoping to draw on other members of the network and learn from each of you as to what works and doesn't work. I'll just mention that the default position for all of the information on the Innovation Toolkit site is it's covered by a Creative Commons by attribution license. So we've put it out there, to be used and reused and built upon, and we want to hear from others about where it could be improved, or for others to pick it up, change it and make it better, and then let us reuse it. I'll just mention the Innovation Showcase. As I think we've already seen from this morning's conversations, the most powerful thing in the innovation process is the power of stories and narrative. It's what convinces people that things have to change from how they're done now. The aim of the Innovation Showcase is to collect those stories from all levels of government in Australia and share them so that others can pick them up and use them as means of convincing that, look, these ideas have been tried and have been successful, or even if they've not been successful, we've still learned things from them that have made things better. And we've got an events calendar for events such as this, so please let us know if there's anything you think should be on it. And here's just the links to the various resources I've mentioned. Please have a look and tell us what you think, and particularly if there's anything else that you think should be included or covered, or even if we haven't taken the right approach. This is very much a living resource, and we have no pretensions that we've got all the answers, but we hope to have more of them over time. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Alex. Just to kickstart it, one of the things that I kept on hearing today was this whole co-collaboration element, a co-creation, and the thing about the narrative and the importance of the narrative. How easy is it to get really good quality stories from people out there?
That's really a little case study. One of the things that really surprised me recently was the Australian newspaper came up with the idea of running an innovation challenge, and I've been the main judge on that, and it's been really fascinating. But the real benefit, apart from getting these wonderful stories, profiles written up every weekend in the main section of the paper, was just this collection of a huge number, over 300 great stories. So I think the power of that narrative, but getting channels where you can get those
written up.
I think we've heard fantastic stories to add to the body of stories here today. And in fact, one of the things we do as we go around the country is listen to people like all of these people, collect their stories and then tell them in the next town. And that's a great way of spreading that innovation message, particularly in public policy. I also, I mean, in terms of the co-creation thing, the term that I used, or Beth Simone Novak, who was Obama's advisor on open government, coined, I think, is wiki government, and that is, getting people involved in the wiki to create, in a wiki sense, to co-create policy and co-create programs is, I think, underpins a lot of what we saw here today.
Yeah, thank you. Some of the other question is, how do the departments truly collaborate when they may have competitive or competing agendas? This is, who have we got there, sitting up there in terms of government here?
I might start with that one. I think actually there is a need, I mean, this is taking it off maybe in another direction, but there's actually a need for us to reimagine government altogether in Australia, across the Western world, but achievable in Australia probably, in that we have what are essentially 1950s organisations, command and control hierarchical structures, trying to respond to what is a networked, highly complex world, and they're just not equipped to do that. The real core of why that perpetuates at all times is the budget process, because the budget process, no matter how collaborative you want to be interagency, actually drives wedges between agencies to dull down that innovation. One of the things I did as Premier, which I think in the long term will have some impact in the Tasmanian Public Service, is I created, together with the head of Department of Premier and Cabinet, for every head of agency, so every DG, collective KPIs in their contracts. That is, we created, for example, a KPI around early childhood nutrition and education outcomes, but we actually embedded that KPI in the Commissioner of Police, the head of education and the head of health and the head of justice department. All of them, none of them could achieve that KPI without all four of them achieving it. To achieve it, they knew they had to work together, and it actually, just in a very short period of time, you had the head of health, the head of education, the head of police meeting on a regular basis to talk about what are we going to do to improve outcomes in early education in early years in disadvantaged areas. Conversations, bizarrely, frankly, that they'd never had before.
Yeah, thank you so much. There's a question for Brodie, and in fact, talking about how they had those conversations in Geraldton. Can you say a bit more about the Geraldton Chamber of Commerce resistance to the possible venture established in Geraldton, and what does it tell us about community and the challenges that innovators face?
Yeah, so it's challenging. So they've been embraced pretty broadly in Geraldton. Well, they have to be because they're community-based, so they need everyone to be working together. Just the comment on the Chamber of Commerce was that these are completely different systems. One is based on a specific type of structure and that hierarchy, whereas what they've built with City Hive is based on that network structure. So there's going to be competition between those systems. I think there is ways for them to work together, but that's what it's about, that transition process, and it's what we're working on at the moment. But yeah,
thanks, Brodie. And this is a really a lovely broad sort of statement. Next one. What's the vision for WA public sector innovation? What a challenge. There we are. Any answers?
Government? I don't think there's anyone here from WA government. So
well, people can, people, it's a really big challenge,
I'll put in a plug for some of the people we've met while Peter Croger and I have been here, particularly out of the Department of Commerce, who are really deeply thinking about how to embed innovation in government, but also how to embed innovation in the SME sector, for example, and other sectors of the economy. And one of the great challenges, I think, for WA is that while you definitely don't have a mining boom, you have sustained economic growth coming out of mining, it masks, of course, the really deep need for augmenting that economic growth by doing the sorts of things Terry talked so eloquently about embedding innovation and building an innovation ecosystem here. And to get frankly, to be honest, to get politicians then to focus on that rather than on the, $250 billion worth of projects that in mining that are going to be here is a really tough challenge, because I'll let you in on a little secret. Politicians like to cut ribbons on things and like to make announcements and all of those sorts of things, and innovation ecosystems, they don't necessarily cut it in terms of comparing that to opening a major rail line or a mine or something like that.
And part of the theme is to cut the red tape with bureaucracy, which is why we're all here.
I was just going to say, so giving people ribbons to cut is actually one of our priorities. Is actually getting started and getting things off the ground is a big part of it. Whereas, this conference happened a year ago. There were some really good ideas that came out of it. I've read the reports, but how much of that has actually happened in the last 12 months? So getting things started, providing those ribbon cutting opportunities, which is what we're doing with a big space on the terrace, gets people interested, gets them involved at that sort of level. So.
You want to say something?
Yeah, I mean, it's really hard because incumbents hate innovation. They hate change, and of course politicians are the worst in that. Some regards. I think the real way you can create change is by empowering the citizens, and so enabling citizen-centric activity and processes, which is what we've been talking about a lot. I think changes the dynamic over time hugely. And that's where the power of social networking, online,
Absolutely.
etc., can just be enormously powerful.
And that
so
links,
I'm very optimistic about this.
And I think that even in the world, we're really in early days about what will explode and happen. So it's not just Australia. To David, there's no shortage of ideas. The real challenge is to assess the ideas and to turn the ideas into practical strategies. And it's the effort should be on the latter rather on the former. Please comment.
Which David?
Albury.
Couldn't agree more, actually, in lots of ways. But there's got to be a balance between the blue sky thinking and the opening people's eyes to possibility and potential, and then the actual practical steps on the ground to achieve something that might have an impact in the future. And the two go hand in hand, but what I'm finding, or what we're finding in communities across Australia, is that we'll take the digital space for example, and it is only one space. They don't really even understand what the potential might be. Once you've opened their eyes to the potential, then you can come back to, okay, what are the things, and we talk about 12 areas, but really, if a community just bit off one or two of those and said, well, actually, we think we can bring together partners, collaborate with others. Often local government says to us, well, we don't have control over health, hospitals, education, schools, TAFE colleges, what have you. No, but if you bring in the partners and you get them collaborating, all of the things that this conference is about, that's how you can have much more outweigh the influence in the practical things that are happening. We try to, I think it's really important to take people right out there and say, well, this is the extraordinary things that are happening, but then bring them all the way back to say, okay, what's the first step towards that extraordinariness?
Yeah. There's also some issues around intellectual property. So how does intellectual property fit in with the future public sector context, especially with the focus on rewards, incentive systems, etc.?
Well, I think it's one of the biggest barriers to innovation we have. And so moves like, I was delighted to hear the Toolkit being on Creative Commons, and the whole move towards open access to public sector information on an open basis, so it can be reused. Just first key starting point. But then we need to just abolish the whole copyright and patent system, and we'll be much more innovative.
Well, I have a view that one of the best things that governments can do in terms of stimulating the IT sector or the innovation sectors broadly is to just say, we don't want the IP, you have it, and go and create wealth out of it. In fact, should, as a matter of course, in every government procurement contract, for a software development, for example, say that you own the IP after the development, we don't want it. Yep. And I'll give a great example of this. We did this in the Department of Education in Tasmania with a local IT group. That IT group took that IP, created a global multinational company out of it based in Hobart with 100-odd employees and created all of that. Well, the Department of Education would have just sat on the IP for that and done nothing with it. So I heard, I think earlier from someone, there was a review going on into the IP. That was from Rob, wasn't it? Yes. And I think I applaud that, and I would say err on the side of giving the IP away. You know, it's no good to anyone locked up in government.
Yeah, thank you. In terms of, I'll move through quite quickly. I think there's some regional questions that are coming shortly, but just any advice or examples regarding breaking through the bureaucracy to get an idea into action?
Good. I might just comment on that. I think the key attribute an innovator needs is patience and persistence. It can seem horrendously slow. When you've got an idea and you've got that enthusiasm and excitement, you want it to happen then and there. Unfortunately, the nature of complex systems, and whether it's in the public sector or elsewhere, is that it does take a long time. If you can identify other partners to build up that coalition of the willing, that's really crucial. And the other things are focusing on those elements like what is the problem you're trying to solve and whether it's perceived as significant enough in the eyes of the decision makers.
Mm-hmm. And linking with that as well is the issue around risk. I'm going to have more questions than time in a minute. I can see it coming, which is wonderful. But the issue around risk and public sector, you know, risk aversion with public sector, how do you get around that?
A couple of years ago, the Australian National Audit Office produced a report on risk and innovation for the Australian Public Service. That was a really important document in that it showed a shift in thinking of the Audit Office of risk. All risk is bad, and therefore you should make it go away, to risk needs to be managed. It was a recognition that risk is inherent in innovation.
Yep.
You can't get rid of all risk, so what are you going to do to manage it? It will still go wrong in cases, but as long as you've shown that you can manage that when it does happen, that can be really important.
I was just going to say, so looking at
on the mic,
looking at it from the broadest perspective, and looking at it in that regard, the big risk is not doing anything and not supporting people with ideas to make that change. And so bringing back to that within bureaucracy, it's actually building those structures into it so people can move their ideas forward easily, which doesn't really happen. But yeah, that's the real risk in our view, is not supporting people with these ideas to make these changes.
And the real problem is, of course, it's not just a government problem. This is a problem across the whole country in the corporate world. And all the regulatory regimes actually reinforce risk aversion, compliance mentality, and no focus on the real issue, which I was really pleased to see raised, about the risk of missing or foregoing opportunity. So the opportunity cost of not doing something, and really fleshing that out. And that's as big an issue in the corporate world as it is in government.
We have a language that we use in the programs that I take called fail-safe, and it's a lovely language to keep in mind. There are two other I have lots of questions here, and I'm going to have to work out what I'm going to do with this, but David Shee, a question for you. How did you evaluate all of the solutions that came in, or did Haggle select the winner? If so, how did Haggle make the selection? Very good question.
Thanks for the question. I think we only evaluated one solution, and actually looking back, we found that the actually runner-up or third place bronze medal winner actually may not be the bad ones from our point of view. So what I'm trying to say is in the process we had in this particular exercise, we only evaluated one solution because Kaggle had their regulations to see how they select the winners. And once the winner was selected, they give the money to the winner, and they receive from the winner the total solution package, which includes a very brief description of the methods used and the actual code, computer code package, and also a very brief documentation. So all the other 300 or 400 solutions, they are out there in the clouds, and we couldn't access them. But also we don't have IP ownership of them. As to the winning solution, we do have the ownership of the IP.
So there's some, yeah, really, and some good learning on there about what you might do differently. And this also asks, thank you, David, Carolyn, can you tell us a little bit about when Family by Family is ready to come into state? So
I get that question quite a lot. What we're trying to do at the moment is understand the best way to move something that was designed in a specific place and space, and how you take that and put it somewhere else, because you can't just pick it up and dump it and expect that it will be just the same. So we're currently designing, between now and Christmas, we're doing some scoping work in this second location in Adelaide, so we can really come up with a methodology and a way of moving family by family and adapting it to new communities. And then I guess for the first part of next year is really around developing a strong business model for us to go forwards, and a strong business case. So Family by Family has been designed for scale, and I hope that sometime in the next 18 months we will be moving to new states, and whether one of those is WA will all come down to who's prepared to put some money on the table and invest in something like this.
So I've got, thank you so much. I've got a question here from the regions. It says, how do you address the issues of existing power structures in the public sector being threatened by innovations, which by its very nature means the distribution of power and resources to more players?
Uncomfortably.
Uncomfortably. Look, I've got some amazing questions, and in terms of our timing, I've got questions around how do you cut across the silos, how do you deal with executive operational issues, how do you make have the best ways to deliver and launch an innovation program across in government agencies, how do you change the mindsets, how do you deal with the difficulties of recruiting people, and how do you get real co-design happen with departments in such a hurry to get things done, followed by a whole range of questions about libraries. And can we just have a general comment to that?
Can I, I'll give a bit of a plug to Alex here and some of the work of Professor Jack English that Alex referred to. You know, how do you reach a destination that's a long way away and appears very hard to get to? Well, you put one foot in front of the other one, and then a foot in front of that one, and then you start that way. And some of the tools that I've got to say Professor Jack English has developed and are available, and there are, I know, firms that deliver them. Use those tools to deliver innovation workshops. It's a great way to start. We've got this idea. Let's use the tool and get someone in to facilitate a one-day session, and let's see where it goes. You know, that's one step in front of the other. You know, you can't solve world hunger. You've got to just start with the tools you've got and use the influences you've got to start. I always describe public policy making as a bit like the sort of popular version of mathematical chaos, which everyone understands as, you know, the butterfly flaps its wings on the South American coast, and we have a tidal wave, or, you know, cyclone off Western Australia, or what have you. It's a bit like that, but you've got to be the butterfly that's flapping its wings at the right time, at the right place, and you never know, you may well cause positively, the cyclone at the other end.
So some other areas about CEOs, getting CEOs and groups, I mean, that's a big part of questions from this group. How do you get CEOs really involved in this whole innovation space?
I think the CEO, they know one of the big issues for all companies and organisations in WA is around recruitment and staff. So that's going to be a huge problem. We're running out of staff, basically. So engaging Gen Y staff and keeping them on board is going to be increasingly more difficult, as it's very easy for them to go to a resources company as their organisations grow. So using innovation as the catalyst as a staff retaining staff strategy I think is probably a good one. That's what the organisations we're working with are doing, because they know they need to, offer these opportunities to their staff, and if they don't, then they'll move on. So.
Can I also just add to that one that CEOs are often very removed from the narrative. They're very removed from the story and the experience of the people. And so one of the things that we try to do at Taxi, and when we were working with South Australia's child protection system, was we really threw that in the face of senior managers and CEOs and directors. And it's about thinking creatively about that. We're all used to typing up 20-page reports and putting that on someone's desk, where, try things like getting some sound bites or some video footage, or, pull someone in and sit them down in front of a CEO, because it's about finding an empathy entry point to them. And they have compassion just like the rest of us, but they just often not exposed to it as much as, people that are closer to the front line are. So think creatively about how you communicate the story to CEOs, because often they just don't have access to that.
But I think it's also the issue that David raised around KPIs.
Absolutely.
And the way you think about them. That's, again, private sector as much as public sector.
Coming and just following in from that, there was a question here about how do you really get co-design happen when departments are in such a hurry to get things done, and in addition to that, shortage of staff. Yeah.
Well, I think you need to look at the sort of wiki government, the co-creation of policy, or the crowdsourcing of government policy, as not as a thing that even in the short term, but certainly the medium term, demands extra resources, but in actual fact can, if done right, can deliver a much more efficient use of the resources that you have. I mean, I always use the example of, and I know one state government that did it, needed to create a new disability action plan, or essentially a whole of government policy on how to deliver for people in the community identified with a disability. So they did a co-creation exercise, and what better way than creating disability policy than actually asking people with a disability what they would like within the constraints of the budget that you have. In actual fact, I think that effort put into crowdsourcing that policy, can be an extremely efficient way, rather than having a bunch of policy officers, sitting in a central agency somewhere, devising it instead.
And I'll just add to that. You often, throughout all of my work on public sector innovation, you often hear from agencies saying, well, there's a problem and then we've got to deal with it, and then the minister goes into the political process and we can't talk to anyone. Bring it back. Start having those conversations well before it becomes a problem. Do things like environmental or horizon scanning, a bit of scenario planning. Think about what are those issues that might arise, and just start having some of those conversations well before, so that when it does come to that, you've got a much better position on which to do that co-design or co-creation, because you've formed those networks and you've got an understanding.
There comes also that understanding about the mindsets and this element about resistance, and I sort of hear, how do you change the mindsets of entrenched people that it's always been done this way? And I know that we started the day saying, if you keep on doing the same way, but it does happen in across with leaders. You're going to answer, I can tell.
Leadership. I mean, it's simple as that.
Demonstrating leadership.
And leadership doesn't come just from those that we always identify as the leaders. Leadership is at all levels of an organisation.
Absolutely.
Also, just not from an organisation, but from a community as well. So there's leadership across the community. And I think Kaggle is a good example. So crowdsourcing those solutions. Often the solutions from Kaggle come from really obscure, strange places. So we don't know where the leaders are going to be, but when they do pop up, actually supporting them to do what they're going to do.
The other thing I found with my career growing up in what was still a publicly owned utility in Telstra was it's amazing. I kept saying I'll just keep doing things until someone stops me, and no one ever did. And it was fabulous.
One of our clients has a little motto, said, "Just do it." And yes, please, David.
In the case of Kaggle competition, we had when we were asked to provide data to CAGO, we didn't have a lot of resistance within the department to say why we want to give all our historic data several years ago to public. Basically, everybody then could go into the data and say, oh, this is your data. So far, this is no good, so it carries some risk. But I guess a couple of people mentioned that it was the leadership who made the decision that we got to do that, and then it happened. And otherwise, without that leadership, we may not be able to actually give all the data away. And even though after that, we believe that there was actually a compromise we give the data, but we can make it anonymous. So, for example, we don't specify which motorway we are talking about. We just have a more neutral description. So there's a compromise to make. But again, I say leadership is very important in this exercise.
And there's a little comment here about when developing open access. I think this is pretty important to information for the public sector. Is essential in building the public sector drive for innovation. Is it correct to say that collaboration with local libraries will be the first step to achieve this? Obviously a pointed question there.
I would say absolutely. One of the great advantages I had when I was Minister for Education is in Tasmania the state libraries and the network of 67 online access centres are actually responsibility of the Minister for Education, not local government. And the use of that network to push out innovative social policy and to crowdsource innovative solutions and so on is absolutely vital. The challenge that every other state, of course, has is there's a relationship between local government and state government and so on that needs to be built, but absolutely vital. The overlay, and Terry talked a bit about this, but certainly David's example of open data from government and that sort of network is an extremely powerful thing. One little project I saw up in Queensland recently where the local government effectively, who ran the local library, who were, and everyone's into genealogy these days at ancestry.com and all the rest of it, made the data, both global positioning and then the drill down data behind the gravestones for their local cemetery available. Now all of a sudden there are all these mashups and people creating applications. You can now, as someone studying your family tree or the history of the area, virtually go to the cemeteries in this region, see the gravestone, GPS position it, then drill through that to the data at the back end and the knowledge that the local archives and libraries store about the family tree related to the gravestone. And what they've found is all of a sudden people are coming to this town to go to the graveyard that they've seen on site, online. What a bizarre sort of but a way that local government can actually make their data available and create some piece of innovation that no one really imagined when they started the process.
And that then leads us to one of our other questions, which was about creative thinkers. The public sector has realised its difficulties in recruiting creative thinkers. How can you innovate without creative thinkers? No one's prepared to speak. It's more than creative thinking, isn't it?
It's more than creative thinking, yet it's a pretty important part to it. Having come from a very stringent public sector space myself, child protection, you know, I definitely thought of myself as a creative thinker when I was working in the department. However, 2 years later at Taxi, I don't think there was very much creative about anything I was doing at all. And I don't know if it's that you don't have creative thinkers within the public sector. I think it's that they're not given the space or the time or the incentives or just the ideas or the platform to be creative. So put me in a room with a designer and then all of a sudden you've got all this creativity that's sort of spilling out all over the place. But when you've got workers that are just consumed by policies, procedures and logistics and you know, reaching their KPIs and making things happen, it's very hard to be creative in that space. So I'm sure that the public sector has actually got a lot of creative thinkers. It's just around creating the space and the time and the platform for that to actually happen. And to be able to do that though, you need a certain openness and you need to be able to also accept other people coming in and I guess spurring on that creativity and opening your thinking up to new places, even if you don't think those places are possible right now.
Yeah, that's a fabulous piece.
Yeah,
Thank you.
that's the model for Space Cube. So for that collaboration space in the city is around the fact that if you've got all these people from different backgrounds in the same place, who knows what they're going to come up with. So we already have, there's people with volunteering startups, so volunteering backgrounds, people from government, people from apps development, and who knows what they'll come up with sitting next to each other and being co-located, and then how do we scale that? So.
There's an example given here, Brodie, and it's about collaboration between a public sector and private sector, and I'm sure we have many of those. Japan is well known for the successful collaboration between the Ministry of Industry and Trade and the private sector. Can the WA public and private sectors learn from this model? And I'm not sure who...
Yeah, I'll just say it's quick. I think there's a lot of work that can be done, but also the public sector here, if you bring it down to pure economics of what they're looking at, is they're interested in productivity, and everyone needs each other to build that productivity and through healthy communities. Also we're finding, so Stockland with the model that we're using with them, it's a complete change from normal corporate social responsibility where they just give money and then that's invested. We're seeing that across the resources sector as well, where there's investment in indigenous social enterprises and all. There's a whole range of new things happening. So now's probably the best time ever to start engaging in that way and collaborating, because the solutions are bigger than any one silo.
I'm going to give you one last question, and what I'd like each of you to do is to give a little quick snapshot of your answer. How can you build a culture of trust in WA public sector to foster innovation and collaboration? That's the question. Just if we'd hear from each one of you a quick, sharp answer. So how can you build a culture of trust in WA public sector to foster innovation and collaboration?
I'll start. I would say, just from my own experience in South Australia, is to find some what we call early adopters. So find some people in the public sector, and they do exist. There may only be 2 or 3. There might be 10, 20, 50. But find some people that are prepared to do something differently and start with them. And if you start with some early adopters, it's amazing what you can make happen as you slowly build that critical mass.
Thank you.
To me, trust is about relationships, and to me the secret is around openness, transparency and disclosure, and the more open and transparent government is, I think the more trusted it will be.
Thank you.
Mine would be probably just get started, so just start doing something, and you work it out, prototype, and you work it out along the way. So that's what we've been doing, and it's changed 3 times and it's still going to change, but get started.
Well, in my case, I would say I work in the Department of Transport, and we have many silos there. And to deal with the trust issues, I think in my case, sometimes the work is that we give first and take second. So, it may not always work, but it works for us.
Thank you.
I'd suggest bringing it down, looking at it at a personal level. It's about how we as individuals respond to those new ideas from other people. Putting forward a new idea when you're new to the innovation process can be incredibly scary. That culture and environment is built upon lots of individual interactions of, yes, I'm interested in your idea. Doesn't have to mean you support it. It's just about listening and that level of dialogue.
Thank you.
Like an ex-politician, I'll say this, that in fact it's an excellent question, because it absolutely correctly identifies trust as the secret sauce, missing ingredient for an innovative culture. Trust underpins the development of social capital, underpins the development of networks, which underpins, and as we've heard so eloquently from other speakers, underpins or is germane to innovation. So my answer to the question would be focus on trust and building it.
Thank you. I really appreciate the audience's way of giving us the post-it notes, because time was really gathering on us, and we've now come back to a wonderful moment in time. May we all like to thank our panel for their contributions and their energy and passion with answering those questions. Thank you so much.